Stephen, I want to go through some of the voting rights changes or voting law changes that are currently under debate in North Carolina that are being pushed through. And let's go through some of the pros and cons of all of them, just because we hear from a lot of people that, well, what they're trying to do isn't so outlandish. Eliminating early voting, there are a lot of places in the country that don't have early voting. Why is that such a big deal?
Many working families have very stringent work obligations, they have family obligations, they have child care obligations. It's when you do, as North Carolina offers 17 days when eligible citizens can vote, which is much more convenient and has been much more successful in terms of voter participation than reducing it to just one day.
Well, I'm just curious because, you know, New York and New Jersey don't have early voting and they don't have same day or they don't have Sunday voting hours. Why is it a bigger deal in North Carolina than, let's say, in New York and New Jersey?
Well, it's actually a bigger deal around the country. We have seen over the last several years, the last several election cycles, a clear trajectory of states enacting reforms like early voting, like same-day registration, which helps open up the franchise, make it more convenient and accessible for people to vote, and have been seeing really some positive consequences of that with rises in voter participation. States with same-day registration typically have voting rates which are 10 or more % higher than states without it. So it's something that we want to continue to encourage to allow more people access to the vote.
I'm sure critics on the right would say you're simply concerned about making it easier to vote in states where minority votes or minority voters could sway the balance, let's say, between Republican and Democratic outcomes. What would your response be?
Well, I would say the truth is that we've got same-day registration in a variety of states, red and blue, across the country, from Idaho to Maine, from North Carolina to Wisconsin. So, you know, it's not a partisan reform, and it's not a reform which is exclusively offered to or benefiting one slice of the electorate. All voters win with same-day registration.
One aspect of the law under consideration in North Carolina affects college students and trying to encourage them to vote at home or discourage them from voting where they go to school. What's the impact there? Why is it unfair to try to have college students vote at home as opposed to where they go to school?
Well, in fact, the law is that the voter can decide for him or herself what their legal residence is for voting purposes. So the student has every right to decide that maybe in North Carolina they would like to register to vote from their dorm location in Chapel Hill versus another part of the state where their family lives. And it's a right that's broadly enjoyed around the country, and it's a right which is kind of extremist majority in North Carolina it's trying to take away.
Stephen, to your mind, what's the rationale behind this push from North Carolina lawmakers? I don't recall hearing this being a big deal on the campaign trail. Oh, we need to get in there and change the election laws. Why is it a big deal right now?
Well, it's a big deal to them, frankly, because they're trying to change the rules of the game, trying to rig the election system to their benefit or their perceived benefit. If they believe that young voters don't tend to vote their way and vote a different way, well, then we're seeing restrictions that will diminish voting among young people. If they think that the African American community is not supporting their candidates, then they're going to try to eliminate same-day registration, which has been a particular benefit among the African American population there. 20% of voting age population in North Carolina is African American. Over 40% of people who used same-day registration to cast a vote last November are African American. So you can go through slices of the electorate, as I think that they are doing, and enacting restrictions which are going to benefit their candidates.
And if I counter that argument by saying, well, every North Carolinian would have to abide by the same rules, whether they're young or old or black or white or college student or not, and so it would impact everybody equally, why is that thesis incorrect?
It's incorrect because the facts show that some of the conveniences are used disproportionately are used more by one slice of the electorate versus another. If you eliminate students, you mentioned students' ability to register to vote at their college addresses, the net effect is likely going to be decreased voting by young people. If you eliminate same-day registration, which has been so successful to help increase voting among African Americans, you're likely to have a disproportionate negative effect among black voters in North Carolina. Another reform, as I mentioned, that the majority is pushing through in North Carolina is a restrictive and unnecessary photo ID requirement, which on its face doesn't sound unreasonable, but the fact is that many people in the electorate, such as seniors, aren't driving, don't have driver's license, and can't show the driver's license at the polls that many other North Carolinians are able to show. And so we see a whole series of restrictions, which in my opinion are very targeted to hit certain segments of the electorate, which these set of politicians don't think serve their political interests.
Finally, Stephen, big picture question here. We're so used to, and in some ways we've become desensitized to the politicizing of so many aspects of public policy debates. What is it that to you is so objectionable about politicizing elections and voting law?
Well, if there is one attribute that defines America and American democracy, it's that fundamental right to vote. The right to choose your leaders, to choose those who will represent you, and the ability to thereby influence the policies and programs that they enact. I find it an abomination to really strike at the heart of what American democracy is about in making it more difficult, more restrictive for people to vote. We've seen tremendous progress in North Carolina over a generation. And what we're seeing now, unfortunately, is an attempt by a group of political leaders to roll back reforms across the board, voting and in other areas as well.